Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me here. Thanks for Satya for organizing this, and Lee as well, and Villanova University for receiving me. So I'll just go straight to it. Well, the title of the lecture is Recuperating Risk, Colombian artist Elkin Calderón's Politics of Place, and I will be centering on two projects by Elkin Calderón, who is a Colombian artist, more or less 35 years old, who works primarily in Colombia. But since 2013, passengers of Avianca planes awaiting takeoff are almost forced to watch on their individual screens a short looped video showing young tourists from different parts of the world being surprised by the magical wonders of Colombian landscapes, towns, people, and carnivals. Colombian coffee beans suddenly drop and reproduce magically, creating this red version of Dorothy's yellow brick road in the midst of the coffee region's green hills. For example, the new campaign promoted by the government is titled Colombia Magical Realism, and it follows a chain of other slogans that were started with Álvaro Uribe's government. For example, in 2003, the first slogan was launched, Leave Colombia, Travel Through It, and then in 2005, one of the most popular ones, still to this day in Colombia, was also launched, Colombia is Passion. These two campaigns were aimed to revive interest in traveling to and within the country by assuring its residents and potential travelers of the nation's safety. To date, though, the most successful international campaign has been Colombia, the only risk is wanting to stay. This campaign was developed by the design agency Sancho BBDO and the Colombian nation, the Colombian government's export agency, Pro-Export. It was launched more or less in 2008 and ran until 2013. This campaign also aimed to promote the nation internationally as an attractive tourist destination, and the marketing campaign, what was particular about it was how it used a term related to the nation, to Colombia, historically, reducing it to this idea of this is a dangerous place to go. The marketing campaign then reoriented this meaning of risk in particular, or the term risk, towards the desire of remaining in the country and staying in its wonderful landscapes in the midst of this forest or paradisiacal beaches, falling in love also with its people, music, handicrafts, among others. By means of 9 testimonies of foreigners who visited Colombia and decided not to return to the places where they came from, the campaign attempted to offer a different vantage point regarding the potential dangers of visiting the country as a tourist or as an investor. The campaign's success was also reflected in the exponential growth that tourism had in Colombia since the campaign was launched. Now, in 2013, Colombian artist Elkin Calderón published the book Colombia, the Risk is Wanting to Stay. The work appropriated the campaign, the government campaign slogan, but added a minor change to it, which were the series of suspension points at the very end. Each of the book's chapters filled in this space with personal stories from 13 Colombian art-related people who had been shot, mugged, raped, whose family members had been abducted or even murdered, replicating thus in an inverted manner the government's campaign and use of testimonies, so that the phrase became Colombia, the only risk is wanting to stay without a brother, without a leg, without a lung, and so on. in this sense, the book acted as the specular underside of a spectacular marketing strategy, a reminder coming from the art world of the persistence of the very violence that the government was trying to dispel with its campaign. And in a way, the book could be considered some form of sabotage, perhaps, as I'm understanding the term, as some kind of a minor revolt that aims to disrupt the images of safety, in this case, circulated by the export agency and the government. But while Calderón's appropriation might seem at first like a clever reuse of pre-existing propaganda to critique its content, the work, I think, goes beyond or around being just an inversion of points of view or values. As has been the case of other artists like Humberto Junca on your left, who have taken one of these slogans and deconstructed its terms in order to, by oppositions, show some conceptual differences or discrepancies between Colombia related to passion. Colombia thus is not a reasonable country or doesn't really focus on reason. What I'm interested in Calderón's projects is how he explores different connotations of the term risk, from peril to possibility, from loss to investment and also chance, while it simultaneously contests the government's appropriation of the term risk for economic purposes. It also, Calderón's works also make visible the borderline territory in which ethical claims in art can be made, especially since he questions collaborative practices even while performing them, as we will see very soon. Now, Calderón's book project emerged from a process of transforming a personal experience, a traumatic personal experience, into a collaborative way to critique a larger system linked to violence. The idea for the book originated in 2012, 10 years after Calderón himself was shot while he was being robbed, while he was trying to buy a car in Bogotá. The accident motivated the artist's migration to the UK, where he met and worked, collaborated with another Colombian artist who was there, Wilson Diaz, and you're seeing some collaborative paintings that they made regarding the odd jobs that they had in the UK. So they, for example, delivered sandwiches during lunch to different corporate offices, among other things. Now, Diaz suffered from a violent family loss after his return to Colombia, which prompted Calderón to share with Diaz a short story that he had written regarding his what had happened to him before in 2002, almost as a commemoration of this traumatic event. And after receiving feedback and motivating Diaz to write his own short story regarding what had happened to a member of his family, both artists met with a publisher, Francisco Toquica, whose younger sibling had also been murdered in Colombia. And the idea of making a book, collecting these stories from people related to the art world, began to form. What surprised the artists in particular during this process was that each person that they talked to, friends from the art world, could refer them to another person that they knew that had a terrible, violent story to tell. So the book more or less merged the two ideas. First, writing as a way of working through the traumatic experiences kept private, and publishing as a form of reusing that personal process by transforming it into a collective public critique of the nation's official denial regarding the continuity of violence within it. In the end, they chose 13 stories from artists, curators, and the publisher, who were also friends. So there was a small community community, not just of artists, but also a friendly community that was part of this project. The book deals with the problem of representing violence in a place where it is both a quotidian, visible matter and an invisible presence. Calderón's approach to the representation of violence, though, differs from the way that violence has been treated in recent Colombian contemporary art, particularly, and I'm showing only two of the best known, perhaps, artists and examples of Colombia right now, in the works of Oscar Muñoz, for example, on your left, and the works of perhaps the most known Colombian artist at the time, Doris Salcedo, on your right. Their approach has been theorized particularly by Maria Margarita Malagón Curca as an example of an indexical way of treating or representing violence. And what she means more or less by this is that in the works of Oscar Muñoz and Doris Salcedo, there is a material treatment of the objects and the literal medium that they are working with that suggests that some kind of forceful, violent action has been performed on these objects. For example, the beaten surface of a chair, or this disappearance of ashes that are going down the sink. And this is a looped video on your left in the case of Oscar Muñoz. Well, so that in the end, the objects presented seem to be almost traces of some past violent action. They speak of some kind of absence. Something happened, but we don't know as viewers exactly what. But there is some kind of material trace of this past action. And Doris Salcedo has repeatedly, and even recently, she gave a talk in Colombia, which is very rare, in March of this year. She mentions how her process of dealing with violence has to do with the problem of how to represent violence without reproducing it, how to move away from this hyper representation of violence that we see in the media and even in art to some extent. Calderón's strategy, though, is quite different from this distancing process that Oscar Muñoz and Doris Salcedo take, insofar as in the book, or the book offers a glimpse into 13 very personal, intimate stories, private stories that deal in a blunt and often sparse manner with the author's direct encounters with violence in the countries. Though the participants in the book are victims of violence, they do not emerge as innocent. Some acknowledge their own mistakes, being at the wrong place at the wrong time, saying or articulating the wrong question to the wrong person, taking the notoriously wrong taxi, among other things. But while their individual actions may seem or may be deemed risky in a colloquial sense because of their naiveness, the act of revealing a private matter involves another form of exposure to damage connected to judgment by other people, by readers as well. The deliberate act of disclosing a personal event is further transformed through the collective act of revelation made by the group of artists that aims to confront the missing information in the government's slogan and undermine the peaceful and kind semblance of the nation that it promotes. By using also the first person, the book replicates the publicity agency's reliance on testimonial accounts to assure the potential visitor to Colombia of an actual fact stated, and also to bestow the narratives with this semblance of truthfulness. Yet, if the book's first-person accounts involve an act of reliving trauma through writing, so that writing became a kind of cathartic exorcism, the publicity reinterprets shock as wonder and uses the testimonial to confirm the affective link made by real people with the country. The advertisements, for example, appeal to love, rapture, desire, and an affective language accompanied by images such as the ones you're seeing right now that inspire a corporeal connection with place, moisture, for example, that turns into these mysterious shafts of light in the jungle, or paradisiacal beaches that are magical and sort of lure the visitor into staying, or fruits sold by amicable and always smiling people, among other images. Though the age group varies, the chosen foreigners all have European or North American ancestry, and they present a success story of fluid insertion into the country and acceptance of it. Instead, Calderón's book is mixed with disaffection, with discomfort, anger, frustration, and very little context is offered, so that the recollections actually seem a little bit murky, sometimes doubtful even, or at least consciously fragmented, so that we don't know exactly everything that happened in them. What lies beyond each case's violence, the social landscape that frames it with a history of forced displacement, internal war, territorial disputes, drug trafficking, this social landscape remains inscrutable or undescribable, yet it is entirely present, unavoidable, and dense in the book. All of the book's contributors could be considered a part of a privileged group related with art, yet their different social backgrounds also provide a glimpse into the gaps and frictions between and within different social classes or different layers of Colombian society, going against the stereotypical images that the government tries to promote. All Colombians are always happy, always kind, always festive, etc., for example. No matter how much affection the artist or this group of people that are telling their stories in the book may feel toward each other, or how much they may identify as an artistic community, their experiences of the country's violence are very diverse and offer little ground for comparison. In this sense, the book problematizes the notion of community, especially as the result of sharing some kind of commonality by coming from the same place or the same geographical location, sharing similar interests, a similar profession, or being part of the art world. Nevertheless, the book also suggests that communities may form strategically to produce counter-narratives, as in this case, and commonalities may cohere unexpectedly through processes of identification. The stubborn persistence of difference within this collective project brings it close, in a certain way, to discussions regarding antagonism in recent art. For the past several years, authors from fields as varied as political theory, architecture, art history, such as Chantal Mouffe, Marcus Meeson, or Claire Bishop, they have emphasized how it is important to think about social conflict when discussing democracy, participation, and collaborative projects. Only these authors tend to critique from very different standpoints the idea that inclusive participation is an ideal form of democracy, and they question the notion that participation is a consensus-based, positive, and politically correct way of taking part in social structures. Meeson, in particular, he understands participation as a manifestation of conflict, since, according to him, every field is made up of forces that are contending, pushing, and changing each other. Yet the equation that he makes in his book, The Nightmare of Participation, between conflict and war, comparing the later, war, with participation, it acquires a different resonance in a place where there are actual armed disputes going on different parts of the territory. Somehow, I would say that Calderón's work moves a little bit closer to Chantal Mouffe's position regarding critical art today, especially how she advocates, for example, and I'm going to quote her briefly, an art that foments dissensus, that makes visible what the dominant consensus tends to obscure and obliterate. This critical art, according to Mouffe, is constituted by a manifold of artistic practices aiming at giving voice to all those who are silenced within the framework of the existing hegemony. End quote. Calderón's book might almost seem to illustrate this idea of widening the artistic field, or the field of action of critical art, and the intention of giving voice to those subsumed by the power of hegemonic messages. But it also complicates, I think, the notion that there is a unique truth to be told about violence. While deliberately opposing the Colombian government's propaganda and capitalist interests, Calderón's project also seems to acknowledge its own mediated character and limited potential as well to subvert these discourses that it impugnates, in a way. And one could compare, for example, the approach that Calderón has to his work with the image that was chosen for the cover of Mouffe's last book, Agonistics, Thinking the World Politically, which was Doris Salcedo's Shibboleth, this large crack from 2007 that was displayed on the floor of the Tate Modern building. Now, Calderón, this could be considered a large-scale approach to political art. Instead, Calderón's works could be regarded more of a minor crevice in the existing systems, a breach easily overlooked, rather than this huge statement, as poetic as it is. In its own materiality, and turning back to the book, or Calderón's book, it plays with the notion of disguised disclosure. It chooses or uses only 5 illustrations, black and white illustrations appropriated from the internet. They all display Andean eagles, condors, vultures, basically. At first, they appear, as you see at the top right, as decorative elements in vases, and these images act as frontispieces to the 5 main divisions of the book, which, by the way, is translated into English as well, so it does have an intention, at least, to reach audiences beyond those Spanish-speaking ones or just Colombian ones. So the images with the vultures move from these innocuous decorative illustrations to more menacing ones, where the condors, as you see below, are vigilant and looking over a small human caravan, an animal caravan that is passing below, until by the end they turn voracious and are just viciously eating one another and other animals. I don't have images of those. But perhaps the place where the book plays more with the notion of disguise, or disclosing something that is visible at the same time, is the cover, where, as you can see, at first it just seems from far back, I don't have the image right now, the whole book, but at first it seems very colorful, and the gaze, I would say, doesn't really fix on a particular element, but on closer inspection, each of those decorative forms turns out to be some kind of bone, a human bone, pelvis, teeth, or from the mouth, or, well, arms, etc. So Calderón is also playing with this notion of the public secret, something that, and this happens in the slogan, the government slogan as well. Just by mentioning risk, I am acknowledging the fact that there is some kind of risk still in the country, but I'm also telling the audiences that there's no real damaging risk to be had if you go to Colombia, but rather the only risk is staying, is being enamored or falling in love with the country. But I'm still recognizing that there is a risk, only it has sort of changed, apparently, forms. And something similar is going on in this, in the cover, which is the most public, the most visible aspect of the book, basically, as it plays with this, it's there, but you don't really see it, but I'm acknowledging that it's there, and if you see it, it's also festive. It's covered or diffused by this colorful appearance. The book also points to an underlying problem of power regarding the appropriation not only of the image of the nation for private interests and investments, but also of its territory. Land struggles have marked the nation's history, including problems of legal and illegal forms of land dispossession and appropriation that are that have led or are related to displacement, poverty, and armed struggle. Though the motives for land appropriation in Colombia vary greatly, a recent tendency has been based on economic interests placed in the agro industry, biofuels, and mining companies as well. The related problems of property, territoriality, appropriation have gone hand in hand with the Colombian government's reinforcement of stereotypes regarding internal danger and criminality, especially in relation to the guerrillas. Who and what is considered a risk, what gets demonized or receives an image improvement, was addressed by Calderón in the promotional video that he made for the book launch that was held in Bogotá in an art gallery called the Valenzuela Klenner. The video flyer, as he calls this video promotional material, included a shot of young men and women dancing in cargo pants, black shirts, and boots to the upbeat rhythms of electronic music. But this was no outdoor concert and certainly no fashion statement, but rather this was a guerrilla hideout and part of the fighters' everyday life, including their moments of relaxation and entertainment. Now, Calderón's video flyer was a direct appropriation of a video that was uploaded by a periodical called the Semana, Revista Semana, which was tied to an article titled Tanja, the exotic dancer of the FARC, which is the main dancer that you see in the image on the left. The title referred to Tanja Nijmeijer, a Dutch woman who joined the FARC around 2004, and she became known through a diary that was found in a military operation against the guerrilla, causing a public uproar in Colombia about the role of foreigners in its internal conflict. She has emerged recently as the public face of the FARC in the peace talks that are taking place in Cuba, and the Colombian press, and this is the relation to this video, has enhanced the contradiction between her serious demeanor and ideological commitment with the playfulness and sensuality of her dance, her own quote-unquote exotic character in the Colombian jungle. And the figure of Tanja points to some of the underlying prejudices within the publicity and the polarized discourses permeating Colombian politics today. She represents the foreigner who, of the slogan basically, who falls in love with Colombia or some aspect of it, risks to stay in a very risky environment of the jungle only for what the press has labeled the wrong reasons. So she's the same character in a way, but reinterpreted or deviating from the norm that the slogan is meaning to reproduce in a way. This time the identification passes through an ideological affinity, or perhaps simply finding in the quote-unquote exotic a meaning or just the satisfaction of a desire. But what Calderón's blatant use or reuse of the periodicals video highlights is how all foreigners are not so welcome in Colombia, especially if they deviate from this supposed norm. Risk was, and this is the second project that I wanted to talk about, was reinterpreted by Calderón in another project involving appropriation presented in November 2013 for La Otra Biennial. This was the first version of a biennial organized by the gallery that manages Calderón's works, Valenzuela Klenner. Since 2007, Valenzuela Klenner Gallery has organized an art fair that is called La Otra, the other woman, the other fair, because it is it was created in open competition with the better known commercial art fair of Colombia, which is called the Artbo. And though both instances can be regarded as an alternative form of tourism, using art to develop some economic interests also, as the other woman, the other option, the other fair, the La Otra organizers meant to distinguish their fair from Artbo, not only through their contents, offering some kind of counter-narrative of Colombian art, so they don't show boteros, they don't show Doris Salcedo, they show other kind of artists. But also they wanted to distinguish themselves in the way of exhibiting and conceiving art projects. So, for example, they began trying out in the previous fairs, intervening different spaces of the city, and for the last version, which they turned the fair into a biennial last year, they decided to show or work with projects dealing with public space and community in their locality, and the gallery is located, I don't have a map right now, but in a very particular place. It's just a couple dozen of blocks bordering the hills of the city. So you're actually looking at one of the neighborhoods from the top of one of the hills, and the rest of the city of Bogotá is expanding north to south on the other side. So this is La Perseverancia, that's the neighborhood that's closest to the northern side of the city. Then there's another neighborhood called La Macarena, and finally the last neighborhood, and they are all like right next to each other, and these are literally like 20 blocks maximum. The last one is called Bosque Izquierdo. So the gallery is right in between those last two neighborhoods. And they wanted to, since there is a continuity, to work with these three neighborhoods. La Perseverancia in particular is a very dangerous one. So they wanted to work with their place and recognize also their own location and the differences that come from it. So Calderón's project emerged from the gallery asking him to create a promotional video for the biennial. And he realized that the three neighborhoods were so different in terms of architecture, as you can see just by looking at these images, inhabitants, social classes, and histories, that he was faced with the problem of generalizing and creating some kind of fictive coherence between, or creating an imaginative community in a way where there was none. So he decided for the video that the only thing shared by literally or in a very practical manner by the three neighborhoods were the streets and the inclination that they have due to their position on the hills. But research into the history of these neighborhoods led him to these carts, four-wheeled carts. They are used in races, not only in La Perseverancia in particular, but also in different towns within Colombia. These are very precarious carts. Literally, it's a wooden board with 4 wheels and a chain that is used to maneuver the cart. It has no brakes or anything. So in the video, this local goes down and up the streets in the cart, and he meets a girl that you're seeing up, and he's sort of following her and asks her out, and she just says, go with la otra, go with the other, go to the fair, or the Biennial. Well, so that's the video. Several things are going on here. First, Calderón became interested in the possibility of recuperating this risky popular game in the context of a neighborhood known by a popular refrain that goes, I think I have it translated somewhere. No. Well, it's known by this refrain, la perseverancia, donde uno sube a pie y baja en ambulancia. So where you go up on foot and go down in an ambulance, alluding obviously to how hard and dangerous of a place it is. But well, Calderón then joined in the project that he developed, involved a race with these carts, and constructing also the race with members of this neighborhood in particular of La Perseverancia, attempting to join different forms and conceptions of risk, physical and psychological, from falling from the cart during the race to just standing by and maybe being robbed while being there in the neighborhood. Several problems regarding preconceived notions of community, otherness, and dialogue began to emerge as the project developed, starting with the image of the artist as this outsider that gets accepted by the community, or this imagined community. There were conversations with the Biennial organizers of meeting the neighbors, doing workshops with them, but Calderón was not quite interested in instrumentalizing the community or the neighbors by making them some kind of model for future action or activism. And he began working with a local carpenter. He fantasized about all of the neighbors coming to the carpenter's workshop and leading conversations there. But once he began working, as you can see in the photographs, the carpenter's shop was so small that he actually worked on the street, which was like a free publicity for Calderón's project that he had not expected at all. So Don Humberto, the carpenter, took out his table and all of his materials, and they were just working on the street. As they worked, people, especially young men, began getting interested in what was happening, and as they approached, Calderón gave them different chores for them to do. But unlike other collaborative projects that attempt to, and I'm thinking of with Facet or well other examples, that attempt to provide some or help a community reacquire, relearn some skill that has been somehow lost, or develop projects from the community's needs. In Calderón's case, he was very surprised to see that all the chores that he assigned to these young men were completely abandoned. They couldn't care less about acquiring a particular skill, a carpentry ability in particular, but they just had this slight interest in what was going on and didn't want to learn anything or have the artist transmit some kind of knowledge. So he had to, in this dialogue that began occurring naturally or anti-dialogue, he had to change his strategies and ended up with the carpenter doing the two cards, which were baptized with names according to the images, appropriated images as well, publicity images from the late 1940s and the beginning of the early 1950s. that related to the location, related to La Perseverancia in particular as a neighborhood, since they referred, I don't know if you can, I didn't translate them, but la chicha embrutece. Chicha is a fermented drink from corn, a popular drink, an indigenous drink in Colombia and in La Perseverancia especially, that was prohibited by the government, which during the late 1940s began these campaigns where publicly they tried to diminish the consumption of chicha and instead promoted, as you can see on the left, the consumption of beer, as if it was some kind of delicious, nutritious milk that in this image a member from the church is feeding very happily a young boy so that he becomes a strong man, whereas chicha is associated with the donkey head and makes only brutes, or that's the result of drinking this particular drink. Well, finally, on the day of the race, I wanted to mention one more thing, sorry, regarding these two cards. They were shown for the Biennial's opening as artworks. They were displayed on the walls so that their object or their functionality as actual objects was reduced to a minimum, and they became just images in a certain way, decorative images. But they were reused for the race, which took place in November, and as you can see, the day was rainy, so the pavement was wet, which added to the riskiness of the race. The street is also quite inclined, and it ends, I don't think, well, you can't really see it there, but the street ends on an avenue that's it has a lot of traffic, so they had to create this barrier, a barricade, literally, to stop the carts since they cannot be stopped. So risk was everywhere during the race, which was organized by the same participants. The artist sort of let go of his directing powers. The Biennial organizers had also insisted on having the players use protective gear that they had bought for the event, but as Calderón well knew from his own experiences with working with people from La Perseverancia, they didn't take orders quite easily, so no one used the protective gear and just let go. Some of the racers they wore cameras so that they could film what was going on, and finally the winner, or the two winners, took the two cards that were made as trophies. Though the project seems to share with other socially committed practices the aim of fostering a spirit of conviviality as a possible basis for the creation of or consciousness of a community, it reveled in how conviviality is also made up of a certain degree of maliciousness. As Calderón tells, the races were characterized by a combination of laughter and cruelty, the later a spontaneous response to another's accident or fall, rather than sympathizing with a community member. What prevailed was mirth in the unexpected, even if it involved an actual accident. Maliciousness is derived from the Latin malicia, or wrongdoing, but here it was not understood as the basis of criminality, for example, as has been the common relation made with the neighborhood and its continuing history of violence, but rather maliciousness was taken as a suspicious attitude, a penetrating sagacity, a sense of the satirical, and even a creative potential. Though where that creativity could lead to was left unanswered. In this sense, the work of Calderón did not attempt to transform the neighborhood's reputation, to offer a solution for its youth, or turn the artist into this heroic adventurer. On the contrary, risk was a real problem the artist had to face when he decided to make a night version of the cards. He had to go into the neighborhood accompanied, and he could not take his camera for fear of being robbed. When thinking and to end of an artist's involvement with a community, very little is usually said about personal risk as part of the pragmatic aspects involved in collaborative artistic projects. And in a similar manner, antagonism often gets abstracted in theoretical reflection as an ideal way to think about participation today, avoiding the risk of falling into simple definitions of conviviality. Calderón's projects recuperate risk in literal, metaphoric, and deeply personal ways to motivate discussion, I think, of what is meant by community and its supposed benefits and dangers. Rather than offering solutions, his works act as the suspension points that he included in the slogan's title, carving spaces of doubt into definitions of the nation, stereotypes of risk, and images of specific communities without giving them up either. In this sense, the gap added to Colombia, the only risk is wanting to stay, basically stays open for other stories besides those 13 ones proposed as well. So thank you.